Tonight's big stories. Inflation remains the top concern for a vast majority of Filipinos across regions and financial classes, according to the latest survey. And it's also the #1 issue they want discussed in the president's upcoming SONA.
One of Pastor Apollo Kiboy's co-accused and Davao Region's 6th most wanted has been nabbed after government offered a 1 million peso reward for her arrest.
And some 26 countries represented by their ambassadors gathered at a forum to show their support for the Philippines as the country marked the 8th anniversary of the 2016 arbitral ruling.
Good evening. Welcome to the show. I'm Regina Lay.
I'm Gretchen Ho.
And I'm Sean Yao.
Okay, so inflation continues to be the top concern for Filipinos based on the latest survey by Pulse Asia. In fact, it's the #1 issue that majority of Filipinos want President Marcos to discuss in his upcoming State of the Nation address, or SONA. The survey, conducted from June 17 to 24, shows that 76%, or roughly 3 in 4 Filipinos, believe the most urgent concern that the government needs to address is controlling prices. It's also the top concern across all locations and financial classes. That's followed by, as you can see, increasing workers' pay at 44%, reducing poverty at 32%, creating more jobs at 30%, and fighting graft and corruption at 22%.
Of these national issues, controlling inflation is the #1 urgent concern that majority of Filipinos want the president to discuss in his upcoming SONA on July 22. 36% want a discussion on how the government is moving to improve the national economy, and 35% want to hear about more jobs. Other top issues that Filipinos want discussed in the SONA include actions to stop the incursion of other countries into the West Philippine Sea and moves to fight graft and corruption in government.
But aside from those demands, Filipinos also acknowledged promises that the Marcos administration fulfilled in its first 2 years. 32% believe that the government was able to strengthen the country's tourism by ensuring easy access to leading tourist spots in the country, followed by the Build Better More program or continuous infrastructure development at 26%. Meanwhile, 24% believe that the Marcos administration was able to defend the country's sovereignty, particularly in the West Philippine Sea. And in terms of the top concern of addressing inflation, only 4% believe that Marcos Jr. was able to do so, specifically with rice. Recall that the administration was able to sell rice at 20 pesos per kilo earlier this year, but only at select Kadiwa outlets. Overall, around 20% believe that Marcos was not able to fulfill any of his promises. Pulse Asia President Ronald Holmes spoke to our sister program Storycon about this earlier, and here is what he said.
Top concern with the high prices of each commodities is the significant majority, 3 out of 4 Filipinos, disapprove of the administration's performance on controlling inflation. So that to me is a striking number. It means maybe the public doesn't see this problem being addressed. And among the issues that the public think the president should focus on and discuss during the SONA, or more specifically what we plan to do, is still controlling inflation. And among the people, when we ask them, what do you think are the promises that have been met by the Marcos administration, one promise that has not been met. Only 4% are saying that the promise in terms of bringing down the price of rice has been met. 20% do not feel that there's any political promise during the campaign or during the proclamation inauguration speech that has been met by the current administration.
There's one thing that's consistent with the most urgent national concerns and what people want the president to talk about in the SONA. It is not changing the Constitution that ranks.
It's not politics,
at the bottom.
not
politics,
Constitution,
not
not West Philippine Sea, not
It's
Alice
really-
Guo, not any of the issues we've been covering.
It's really the high prices of everything.
And we feel
wages
it.
really pretty
Yeah.
much stagnated,
Although
and
West
despite
Philippine Sea
the
issue
wage
is still
hike.
quite popular.
But people feel the government is doing enough. In terms of what they want the government to do more, it's still prices, right? I mean, we all feel it.
I personally feel it, so I agree completely with the
On
results
to-
of that survey.
It transcends social classes.
Exactly. On to another survey. When it comes to senatorial preferences for the 2025 midterms, well, guess what? ACT-CIS Congressman Erwin Tulfo emerged on top. He's not the only Tulfo there. His brother Ben was also ranked high, along with former President Rodrigo Duterte, former Senate President Tito Soto, and Senators Pia Cayetano and Bongo. Rounding up Pulse Asia's top 12 are Amy Marcos, Manny Pacquiao, Ping Lacson, Isko Moreno, Bato de la Rosa, and Bong Revilla. There are also some names that didn't make the Magic 12 but stood out. Take a look at that. There's Vilma Santos, Kiko Pangilinan, Ted Filon, Gibo Teodoro, Mar Rojas, Ralph Recto, and Frank Drilon.
Landing in the bottom of that survey are Baste Duterte, Pulong Duterte, Bam Aquino, and other names that have been included in the list are Ding Dong Dantes and Cesar Montano. Here is what Holmes said about the ranking of the Tulfos and the Dutertes.
Yung Tulfo is really a result of with this more continuous exposure to media since they have a show of their own compared to, let's say, the Duterte sons, who occasionally make pronouncements that are captured by the courts, but not as frequent as, let's say, the media presence of Ben or Erwin Tulfo, for that matter.
I guess that survey also answers somehow our question of whether the popularity of former President Duterte translates to his sons. Medyo mababa ang rating. Pero ang interesting sa akin, nag-appear doon si Ronald Llamas.
Our very own. He said he ranked above the Son of God, who is Apollo Kiboy.
Oo nga.
And the Kingmaker, who is Vic Rodriguez.
Oh
Or self-appointed Kingmaker, I should say. I'm talking about the title of his book. I'm not saying he's the appointed
Very
Kingmaker.
interesting survey. Well, speaking of Pastor Apollo Kibuloy, it's been only a few days since the Interior Department announced a bounty on the heads of Apollo Kibuloy and his 5 co-accused, and already authorities have made their first big arrest. Mon Guaves with the story.
The PNP presented Pauline Canada to the media this morning. She is one of the co-accused with Pastor Apollo Kibuloy over charges of qualified human trafficking and sexual abuse. Canada, who is the 6th most wanted person in the Davao region, was arrested yesterday in one of her houses in Davao City. According to the PNP, the recent reshuffling of commanders and officers in the Davao City Police had nothing to do with the success of the operation. Instead, the police attributed the arrest to the release of Canada's wanted poster on top of the announcement of a 1 million peso reward for information on her whereabouts. Authorities said they received a tip on July 9 from an unknown caller. The informant was able to recognize Canada from the wanted poster.
We don't want to share yung intelligence po namin, but sinasabi lang namin nahuli po yan because of a tipster na nagbigay po sa atin because sa reward. He used to be sa finance po doon ng KOJC. Yun po yung pagkaalam natin kay sa ating na-arresto po.
The PNP said they were able to arrest Canada in her home in Davao City, just 2 kilometers from the nearest police station. This short distance begs the question, why wasn't the PNP able to arrest Canada sooner? But the Davao Police was quick to defend the operation.
Hindi ko alam kung ano naging problema nila. So, ask them please. Pero I'm not in the position to actually answer that. I am very sure na walang ganon sa hanin ng kapulisyahan. I-1 plus 1 nyo na lang. Bahala na kayo kung paano nyo i-1 plus 1 yan. But the bottom line is, ito na, may pinapakita kami resulta sa inyo.
What's clear for the PNP is that the 10 million peso bounty for Kibuloy's arrest and the 1 million peso reward for each of Kibuloy's co-accused were a huge boost to their manhunt operations.
That's a fugitive dulo, kaya nga nahihirapan, kaya nga sabi po ng ating secretary, it really helped yung nagbigay tayo ng reward kasi marami nagsusumbong. You know, it's mahirap maghirap pong hanapin ang tao talagang nagtatago.
Canada's lawyer meanwhile questioned the arrest.
We did not have access to Ma'am Pauline from the time that she was arrested at 1:40 up to 12 o'clock midnight hanggang sa kaninang umaga lang napapuntahan namin ang aming co-counsel. Ang nilabag lang nila is hindi nila binigyan ng access.
Aside from Pauline Canada, the PNP said they have been receiving information on the whereabouts of Kibuloy and 4 other co-accused who remain at large. These are Ingrid Canada, Crescente Canada, Jacqueline Roy, and Sylvia Semañez.
Lumiliit na ang Pilipinas para sa kanila. Lumiliit na ito. Ganyang gumalaw ang pulis, ang military. Saka na magtatago niyan, ang taong bayan pa. Pastor, alam ko naman na you have your reasons, no? Sinasabi mo, you're innocent. Just surrender. Ipresenta mo ito sa court of law.
For News 5, Mon Gualvez, we are One News.
This one's another big story. Suspended Bamban Mayor Alice Go is now being suspected of money laundering after billions of pesos were reportedly deposited into her bank accounts, which are now frozen along with other high-value assets. Men Los Baños with the report.
A freeze order has been issued against the bank accounts and assets of suspended Bamban Tarlac Mayor Alice Go. This includes 36 personal bank accounts, a dozen real properties, and vehicles, as well as the infamous helicopter. The freeze order also covers the assets of Baofu Land and the Go's family's other businesses. All in all, there are 90 bank accounts across 14 financial institutions that are under the freeze order. Senator Win Gatchalian now thinks there could be money laundering involved, especially with the billions of pesos that were deposited into these accounts, according to AMLAC. Most of these transactions happened from 2019 to 2022, the same period that the Pogo hub in Bamban Tarlac was built. A big chunk of the deposits also allegedly came from China.
Binigay nila sa amin yung amounts. At malaking amounts talaga. We're talking about billions. No? In a span of 3 years, billions yung pumasok sa accounts ni Alice Go. Pero if you look at their corporations, both the income statements and the statement of cash flow, walang billions. Puro hundreds of thousands lang.
Gatchalian said they will ask the Anti-Money Laundering Council in the next hearing to explain how this amount of money was able to be transferred undetected. The banks involved will also likely be questioned.
Baka yung mga bangko, lalo na yung mga branches, mayroon ring kontsaba na nangyari. At bakit ngayon lang lumabas to? If you look at the timeline, 2019 pa, no, na malaki yung transaction. Iba, tinitignan ko yung transaction niya. In a span of 3 years, almost billions yung pumasok sa sa account niya. Bakit hindi na-report ng bangko? So ang suspetsa ko dito, meron rin pagkukulang yung bangko.
Go's family meanwhile is dismayed over the AMLAC releasing records of the mayor's assets.
Kasi ang AMLA report, covered yan ng data privacy. Yung mga breach niyan, pwedeng masubject sa criminal at civil sanctions ng mga gumagawa niyan. Well, of course, mayroong mga exemptions dyan. Pero kailangan yung mga sensitive data, hindi sa publiko.
Go's lawyer also said releasing such information could have a negative impact on investments.
Mga AMLA report, ano ba ang interest ng public? Ang ginagawa ng ganyan, dinidiscourage mo yung mga investors na maglagay sa bangko at mag-invest. Kaya babagsakan ang economy natin.
But for Gatchalian,
on the contrary, kaya hindi tayo maalis-alis sa gray list because of money laundering and Pogo.
the Senate will continue its hearing on Pogos, and all eyes are on the arrest warrant that could be issued soon against Go and the others accused. For News 5, Mean Los Baños, we are One News.
Well, the Justice Department has begun its preliminary investigations into the 2 Chinese nationals who were allegedly among those operating the raided Lucky South 99 hub in Porac, Pampanga. Fellow Chinese nationals filed complaints against Qin Renguo and Zhang Shiguang for alleged human trafficking, serious physical injuries, serious illegal detention, kidnapping, and robbery with violence or intimidation of persons. And one of the complainants was a man rescued by the Presidential Anti-Organized Crime Commission, or PAO, at Lucky South 99 while still handcuffed to a bed frame. PAO has since assured the safety of all their witnesses.
Yung mga witness namin, totaling siguro mga 25 yung mga witnesses na yan. Sa iba't ibang pogo na ni-raid namin at iba't ibang kaso. Kami nagpo-provide ng allowance nung pinaka-dorm nila, yung tutuluyan. Tapos kailangan masaya sila eh. Ang mabigat nito, Titi, yung kinukwento ko sa iyo kanina, even yung isang witness namin, talagang grabe kung takutin siya. Tapos to the point na binangga nga yung tatay niya, buti na lang nabalian.
Literal na sinagasaan yung tatay?
Sasagasaan yung tatay niya.
Nahagip na lang?
Nahagip talaga at buti na lang nabuhay yung tatay niya. So ngayon, pinagamot namin yung tatay niya.
President Marcos, in fact, visited San Fernando, Pampanga today for the distribution of aid to farmers and fisher folk Porac, Pampanga is where a luxury resort spanning more than 2 hectares was discovered, which is believed to have been a playground for illegal Pogo activities. Also in Porac is, of course, the 10-hectare compound of Lucky South 99, the rated Pogo hub that's been hogging the headlines. Marcos said they formed a task force to look into Pogo-linked crimes.
Sa katunayan, meron na kaming ginawang task force galing sa DILG para tutukan ang mga iligal na gawaing kaugnay ng mga naririnig natin mga Pogo at patuloy din ang pakikipagtulungan ng Bureau of Customs sa ilang ahensya upang matigil ang pagpupuslit na iligal na droga dito sa bansa.
Up next, the Philippines celebrates today the 8th anniversary of the arbitral ruling in the South China Sea or the West Philippine Sea. But 8 years later, is it necessary for the country to file new arbitration cases against China? We'll ask that question and more to former Solicitor General Florin Hilbay when we return. Keep it here on One News. Welcome back. You're still watching the big story here on One News.
Well, today marks the 8th anniversary of the 26th Hague arbitral ruling, which invalidated China's sweeping claims in the West Philippine Sea. And to commemorate this, more than a dozen ambassadors gathered at a West Philippine Sea forum organized by Strat-based ADR Institute, many of whom spoke up in support of the Philippines. Marin Enriquez has that story.
Malayo pa pero malayo na. This was how retired Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio described the Philippines' progress on the 8th anniversary of the landmark Arbitral Award. The ruling invalidated China's 9-dash line, which claims almost the entire South China Sea. Although sidelined by the previous Duterte administration's closer ties with China, Carpio, who was an observer in the case filed at The Hague, still took pride in the victory.
At least now, the naval powers of the world are supporting us, the U.S. and its allies. They want to have joint patrols with us in the West Philippine Sea. They use the Arbitral Award as their justification for sailing in the West Philippine Sea, and that is enforcement.
In 2013, the administration of former President Noynoy Aquino filed a case against China at the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Even though it took 3 years to reach a decision, it is said to have helped ordinary Filipinos become aware of the issue of territorial disputes.
Sa lahat ng surveys ay maraming mga Pilipino, overwhelmingly, ay critical sa China, critical sa kanilang aggression sa ating EEZ, at handang labanan ng China. So merong emerging patriotism na ngayon lang nagsimula kumpara nung panahon ni Digong.
Because of the Arbitral Award, more countries have supported the Philippines in the issue of territorial disputes. Carpio also said we need to continue filing arbitration cases, such as for the extended continental shelf, Ayungin Shoal, and Scarborough Shoal. National Security Advisor Eduardo Año, for his part, said the Philippines has no intention of entering into war, but he emphasized that the country will respond if necessary.
Malinaw naman ang sabi ng ating Pangulo, ang ating diplomacy, open tayo sa mga constructive dialogue. But one thing is sure, we will not lose a single inch of our territory. We will fight for our national interest.
To commemorate the 8th anniversary of the arbitral ruling, allies of the Philippines, represented by their ambassadors, showed up to support the West Philippine Sea Forum organized by Strat-based ADR Institute. At least 26 countries were represented at the forum, and the envoys of Australia, the US, France, and Japan spoke out in support of Manila.
We will continue to pursue, collectively, maritime security in the West Philippine Sea. And as the Australian ambassador to the Philippines, I can tell you this: you can count on Australia.
The United States is proud to stand with the Philippines as we work together to bolster our 73-year-old alliance.
Recently, the Philippines also signed a reciprocal access agreement with Japan. This agreement is expected to be followed by a similar pact with France. Beijing has hit out at these alliances, for instance, saying that the RAA with Japan encourages Tokyo's historical revisionism. For News 5, Marian Enriquez, we are One News.
Meanwhile, retired General Andres Centino, who is currently Presidential Assistant for Maritime Concerns, also spoke at the forum. He laid out other initiatives the Philippines has been working on to shore up international support. He said in January of this year, we signed an MOU on defense cooperation with the United Kingdom and Canada, plus an MOU also on incident management in the South China Sea with Vietnam. Similarly, this year, we signed the MOU and enhanced maritime cooperation with Australia. With Germany, our country's transport agencies signed the joint declaration of intent on strengthening cooperation in the maritime sector in March. Centino also said that there will be an agreement to deepen cooperation with the United States in addressing illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. In May, an MOU on maritime cooperation with Brunei also was signed when President Marcos went there for a state visit. In the same month, the Philippines signed a loan agreement with Japan's JICA, who will fund maritime safety capability improvement projects for the Philippine Coast Guard. And just last Monday, the reciprocal access agreement with Japan was signed. Later this month, Centino said the Philippines will be signing a defense cooperation agreement with Singapore.
And as they do every year, activists also held a protest to mark the 8th anniversary of the arbitration ruling, this time at the Boy Scout Circle in Quezon City. The demonstration was organized by Atty, the same group that organized a large civilian mission to the West Philippine Sea back in May and December of last year, and was comprised mostly of members of Akbayan. They held up placards saying "China out" and "Chinese monster ship out of WPS." Advocates also renewed the call to declare July 12 as the West Philippine Sea Day, echoing a similar proposal made by Senator Risa Ontiveros. Atty. Co-convener and Akbayan President Rafaela David said that by declaring it as such, we strengthen the collective memory of our fellow Filipinos and remind one another that the stakes are very real.
Well, joining us now to look back and discuss the landmark ruling, we have with us tonight former Solicitor General Florin Hilbay, who was actually the one who argued the Philippines' case at the Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague. And we are honored to have him join us live here in studio tonight, this being a special day. Good evening, Attorney Hilbay. Thank you for coming out of the woodwork to speak with us about this very important ruling. Today is all
Once
about...
a year I'll do this.
Only on July 12 every year. I said it in my intro, but not a lot of people know it. You actually led the Philippines, well, former Albert Del Rosario led the team, but you are the one who argued the Philippines' case in that closed-door hearing.
Okay, well, the Philippines had what is known as an agent or the official representative, and there were two agents during the arbitration. The first one was former Solicitor General Francis Hardelesa. And when he got appointed to the Supreme Court, I was the one who replaced him. And so I was burdened with the unenviable task of having to sign Solicitor General. There was a legal team from Malacanang. We also coordinated with the Department of Foreign Affairs. And then, of course, we coordinated with the American Council.
On paper, you were the only signatory.
Yes, there's only one who signs, and so there's only one who gets blamed when something bad really happens.
But something good happened.
But yeah, we won.
Yeah, but it's very difficult. It was very difficult to anticipate what the arbitral tribunal was going to do because this was an entirely novel case. And in many ways, this was a highlight event for the UNCLOS itself because the system is still quite new. They're still trying to build their set of laws and jurisprudence. And so we believe that had the tribunal dismissed our case, then they simply would have basically destroyed their own institution. And so this was a make or break case for the tribunal itself.
And if I'm not mistaken, they use this now as a precedent for other such cases, right?
Right. It becomes a very important statement of issues that are similar to the case that we won.
Attorney, we're showing the photo of the group. This is back in 2015, I believe.
2015.
Who was with you then at the front? Of course, we have the late secretary.
SFA, the Secretary of National Defense, Ronald Llamas, of course, some members from the Department of Foreign Affairs.
They were there in what capacity? As
observers, no? One of the, I mean, there's a PR aspect to this entire thing, and one of the recommendations of the Foreign Council was to bring a large enough contingent, so we're able to communicate that we're really serious with this case.
Okay. Let's go to the arbitral award that the Philippines got and won in July 12 of 2016 at the transition phase of the Pinoy administration to the Duterte administration.
12 days
that
after.
Was right in the middle of that.
Right.
And the Duterte government obviously took a surprising turn after the win by having friendlier relations with China, which they justified as saying this arbitral award is just a piece of paper. The real battle is out in the seas. And now the Marcos government has taken a different turn, pivoted towards a different direction, taking on assertive transparency and going head-to-head with China out there. My question for you is, did you expect things to unravel the way they did from 2016, the way it did during the Duterte administration? Did you expect that to go that route? And are you happy with the way this administration is standing up for what we won back in 2016?
Okay. I think, the previous administration, one way or another, was compromised, right? They were too nice to the Chinese, and so there was a lot of disappointment on the part of Filipinos and those who argued the case for the Philippines, right? And so they pivoted hard towards China from the position of the Pinoy administration to fight it out, right? So what we were able to accomplish was a legal title and moral high ground, right? I think the Duterte administration, on the other hand, saw it as a purely political tool, right, to establish friendlier relations with China. The uniqueness of our constitution is that basically every 6 years you can have a new policy. And now that you have a new president who seems to be more allied with the United States rather than with China, then you have a policy of greater assertiveness over our rights.
But then they also said, the Duterte government defends themselves by saying there was no way to enforce that ruling because the UNCLOS doesn't have an enforcing body, and that was the more pragmatic route for us to take to be able to sign or have an agreement with China to let our fishermen fish in our EEZ. For one, in Bajo de Masinloc, Scarborough Shoal, they had to establish those relations to be able to protect the welfare of Filipinos out in the West Philippine
well,
Sea.
of course, you have to look at the communities that have skin in the game. Of course, the most affected here are our fisher folk. And if you look at it from that perspective, then there's plausible justification what the previous administration did. And then, of course, you need to ask the larger question, which is, at what cost, were we able to accomplish that, sort of intermittent peace between China and the Philippines? It's only now, I think, that facts are coming out, about the previous administration that allows us to see maybe the way in which they overextended, in terms of their pivot back to China. So now that you have a new administration, which has become more assertive of the title that we were able to earn, you have a basically new set of considerations, which is, should we file another case against China? Should we set up better alliances with, say, the ASEAN, Japan, the EU, and Australia, which have a lot of economic interest in the region?
So should we file another case?
It really depends on the president, because this is a potentially legacy-defining moment for him, as it was for President Aquino and for President Duterte. And, if you want to talk real politics here, you might want to ask what's in it for him, right? Can he dribble this thing? And if he's thinking, at the very pragmatic level, he's probably going to have to ask himself, how do I move forward? So he's looking at the 2025 elections, and that might be a way by which he's able to distinguish the administration candidates from the opposition candidates, like pro-China versus, pro-Philippines, right? He also has to look at the allies. There's a lot of uncertainty, for example, with respect to the MDT. Some people would say, we're just ants here, and the elephants that are fighting is really the US and China. So can we rely on the United States to defend us? And, the MDT really is just a political document. It really depends on the interests of the US. And there's also a lot of uncertainty in the US right now. Who's going to be the president, by the end of the year, right? And what will a Trump presidency mean for the Philippines? And will Biden run again for the election? You also have to look at China. China's economy is imploding. Right? One of their biggest banks just declared bankruptcy. 40 banks just disappeared in the last few weeks, right? And the problem with, economies that are, countries who have problems with their economy is that they're looking to pump prime their economy. And a war is a very good way to pump prime your economy. And given the uncertainty everywhere, you have a situation in Ukraine, in Palestine, and possibly in Taiwan. Would you want another flashpoint, which is the South China Sea? So those are the things that President Marcos might want to consider, right?
But I wanted to ask you, Attorney, you're in a unique perspective, which is you guys filed a case.
Right.
Then you just had to wait and see what would happen. Nobody knew, right? In your opinion, the way that it has been used by the last two administrations, the current one and the previous one, are you happy with how it has been enforced? We already discussed how different the approaches were between the Duterte administration and the current one, at least where this one is leading to. How interesting is it for you to watch this all unfold? What really goes on in your head?
Well, my advantage is that I can always sit down and say I've done my part, right? And it's really very difficult because there's so many moving parts. It's unfortunate that we will no longer be able to ask, for example, former President Aquino, right? What his considerations were in filing the case. Well, we can still ask President Duterte what his real considerations were, but the reality is we're at some sort of disadvantage because of the nature of our politics, right? In China, because of the structure of their politics, you can have a very long timeline.
You mean Xi Jinping can rule forever?
Yeah.
Well,
and say one thing forever.
For as long as he wants.
We have discussed that because they are, well, let's say it, they're communists.
And he's already tweaked the rules to keep himself in power.
Exactly. And so he can prepare for a very long time.
And he can maintain one line.
Right. Whereas in the Philippines, you need to change your president every 6 years. Unless, of course, you have a new constitution before the end of President Marcos's term and he gets to stay on in power and therefore develop a longer timeline when it comes to establishing a definite and clear policy with respect to the West Philippine Sea.
So do you think we have actually not managed to come up? I mean, it has been 8 years. What with the political system here, policies will change every 6 years. Do you think that it's even possible for us to form like one defining overarching policy?
Right.
Because it is possible, even with our setup.
Yes, of course. I think you need to take a very long view when it comes to, issues with respect to the West Philippine Sea. The most important part of winning the case that we're able to get the title, right? That's really bad for China because it puts China at the defensive. It places China in the position of the aggressor. And it takes a lot of effort to be able to overcome that. And so what China has right now is time, political might, right, and economic power. Will it be able to sustain that, right, and at some point be able to take over the entire South China Sea and just dispense with the UNCLOS system? I don't think it can do that. And so I think at some point, the title will become very important. We'll be able to use it in a very significant way.
It is being referenced by studies all over the world when it comes to maritime territory. So it does help set a precedent to everything else. But as you mentioned, China is very good at knowing their strengths and knowing our weaknesses. And you've mentioned already a suggestion that the current administration can do, which is to have a West Philippine Sea point person. You mentioned that, and
that was before June 17.
June 17 happened.
After June 17 happened, we were all sitting here thinking,
was he right? Was he correct in what he said?
And we did ask a bunch of analysts about your suggestion and
they
know what they thought about it. Because, I mean, we saw after the fact, after you had said it, that's the time we saw the
and they did defend having several spokespersons. We asked them directly, and they told us that they were all singing to the same tune up until June 17, when a party was out of tune, right? Specifically in that incident, and that's where it gets complicated. But other analysts will say that actually helps us because taking a look at the chessboard, we're the weaker party. If you're going up against a superpower, it probably would help to be able to confuse them somehow.
Well, it's possible that that's precisely President Marcos's strategy, which is deliberate uncertainty, because he's probably buying time, thinking about the timeline for when he wants to act, whether he really wants to file a case or not, or maybe just sit down and wait things out and let the next president take care of the matter. Because, again, if you ask me, what's really in it for him? Right? I mean, filing a case is a defining moment in his presidency, and there's no assurance that we're going to win this time around.
So that's a
Attorney,
win.
I have a thought on that. Right. The one thing, though, that this has accomplished, it is one of the things that Filipinos seem to agree on top of we have to handle inflation.
Right.
The other thing that Filipinos agree on is what to do. It's one thing that actually unites, right? That was a campaign promise of the Marcos administration.
Well, no,
Keep talking about unity.
No. They, to be clear, they are united that we have to do more in the West Philippine Sea. But the question of whether we should spend to file a case has not been asked to the electorate because you guys spent a lot of money to file that arbitration case, right?
Right.
So again, comes back to.
I think if we decide to file a case, we can do it in-house. There's probably enough people within government institutions, the OSG, the DFA, even Malacanang, who are knowledgeable enough to do this time around. The real question is, does the president want to do it? Because no one will want to do this.
What grounds have we not covered with the first arbitral award?
And why? Why would the president not want to go there, so to speak?
Okay. What grounds? I think the damage that China has done, is basically a very powerful platform for filing another case. Assessing the amount of the damage, I think, is very important.
You're talking about the environmental damage.
Right. Maybe you can have a greater clarification of the rights of the fisher folk. Right? Filing a case is really not that easy because China has so many weapons. Right. The situation is in Australia, for example, is a very good exemplar. The economic retaliation of China, against the action of Australia was really very burdensome for the wine sector, the lobster sector, etc. And so it's really not that easy. The way to look at it really is the filing of the case is not simply a legal matter, right? It's a very political matter as well. Because if you look at Filipinos, they will say that, well, didn't we just win that case, right?
Isang kaso na naman, hindi naman ma-enforce.
Exactly. But for those who have effective authority and power, right, things are so much more complicated, right? Because there's always a timing for everything. You don't want to file a case in which the world will see the Philippines as being the tip of the spear. Right? When we filed the case against China in 2012, we basically asked everyone, can you join us? And no one joined us. Everybody was behind the Philippines, but nobody decided to stand beside us. And so we paid for everything.
And now it's cool to support the Philippines.
Right. So, for example, if you look at the event this morning, Australia, Japan,
the
Singapore, the US were behind you, strong statements, but they're basically urging us to do something on our own, right?
Right.
Because
it's not
they themselves
beside us.
Right. And we're the ones that's being pushed, to fight China, and that's something that places the president in a position of brinkmanship because it's very difficult to know and assess what China is going to do if he decides to file a case. Like, for example, say up the ante in the West Philippine Sea, do something, that makes the president really, that really embarrasses the president and the nation, right? And what will he do when he's placed in a position of brinkmanship? That's a reality that we have to face. And so I really don't envy the president, the solicitor general, or the executive secretary, because there's so much uncertainty, right? And we don't really have a lot of tools, but we do have the title and the moral high ground, and what they do with that,
It's a question.
is a question for them to decide.
We could debate the filing another case ad infinitum, but in the end, I think most of the analysts we've spoken to agree that China will never recognize any of these legal cases. But my question to you is, if I had a magic wand and I could take you back to that point in time in 2012, what would you do differently? Now,
If anything.
if anything, and if you knew that the next two presidents will be Duterte and Marcos, what would you do differently?
Nothing really, because that's a 100% win for us, right? You know, when we were assessing the probability of winning, you know, the many cases that we filed, the many issues that we filed against China, we never really expected that we would win everything, right? The win was actually better than expected, right? Because there were, in fact, a lot of debates internally, right, among the lawyers and policymakers within the Aquino administration as to what is the nature of an acceptable defeat or a happy win or this type of win. We
Wait,
never
so the
actually
award
talked
was actually better than you guys had expected, or you personally had expected?
Well, I think you need to manage your expectations.
All the
right?
time, yes. I agree with you on that.
You know,
No, I think your team took on this very smartly, knowing the limitations of the arbitral tribunal, knowing which points to argue and which road to take. You were very, very specific.
well,
with
you know, in hindsight, we look like geniuses now, but when we were doing the case, you know, there was
A
so
lot of
much uncertainty.
uncertainty.
We never were really sure as to how the tribunal was going to decide. All I knew was that you need to look for the best possible arguments for the case and make the arbitrators, you know, see and feel the case for the Philippines.
Amazing. So you ended up making the right decision every step of the way, even though back then it didn't feel like it. So it's all like, it's
So
funny
no
you say that.
regrets.
There were so many debates every step of the way.
Although at this point, China still says that the tribunal did not have jurisdiction.
Well, you know,
That
they
they
can't do
issued
anything
that
about-
just yesterday. Actually,
but
they
half
put out
of the award actually talks about jurisdiction.
Yes.
Right.
You know, you need to realize that the arguments that we use against China were China's arguments when we were drafting the UNCLOS. Number two, China is still part of the UNCLOS system, which has a compulsory arbitration mechanism. I'd say at the highest level, China knows that they lost the case. China understands the meaning of the decision, but for political reasons, you know, they simply
They will never acknowledge it.
they will never acknowledge it. I'm sure that there were a lot of people that higher level.
Would you say, even if they don't acknowledge it publicly, they do somehow adhere to it in the seas
Well,
with how they've been acting?
so long as they are parties to the UNCLOS, right, they're bound to comply. The fact that they haven't, you know, used military might, the fact that they're actually asking for some kind of a compromise is in fact implicit recognition that they know that we have rights over the case. If I were China and I absolutely knew I had full rights over 95% of the South China Sea, I'm not going to talk about joint development with the Philippines. I'm not going to look for compromise. I'm not going to just patrol. I'm going to take over the entire area. And if you look at it from that perspective, right, that's recognition that China knows that it doesn't have the legal rights over the West Philippine Sea. It doesn't have strong grounds. All it has is
It does have
political
mischief
might.
reef, though. Since then, I think they've
Yes,
you
but
know, fully
that's been declared
militarized.
as having been constructed illegally,
right.
right? And so I think
So
if you
still
look
a
at it
win.
from the
Yeah.
standpoint of China, their basic principle is, yeah, we recognize the UNCLOS, but every superpower is an exceptionalist. And we are a superpower now. And we do what we want to do, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's the reality of the situation. Now, whether the Philippines can gather enough courage and muster enough support so that everyone in the region, the ASEAN, Japan is highly dependent on the South China Sea, Australia and the US can put some counterweight to what China is doing, is really up to the genius of the current president and the future
and also the
presidents of the
domestic
Republic.
politics of the countries that you just mentioned, right?
Yes, the domestic politics and what happens in the United States in the coming months.
You know who's not a signatory to UNCLOS is our biggest ally, the
Yes.
United States. But that is a conversation for another day. We have run out of time. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Former Solicitor General Florin Hilbay, and again, the one who argued the Philippines' case at the Permanent Court of Arbitration.
Well, we are wearing Philippine colors. Almost.
Sort of.
I'm in black.
We tried.
Red. Blue. It's blue on the screen.
Is it?
Blue behind us.
What's pink? There's no pink on the flag.
We're just celebrating the Philippines today, girls.
Oh, we should have color coordinated.
You know what else we're celebrating
What?
today?
What?
Alice Lealgo's birthday.
Allegedly.
Oh my God.
Allegedly.
One of them. One of
Allegedly.
their
The real
birthdays. I don't know which is the real one, but so one of them. Alice Lealgo's birthday. On her NBI.
So you want to send her a
clearance.
cake? Do you know where she is?
Nope.
Nalilito na rin ako.
I will never say that on air. All right, thank God it is Friday tonight. Happy weekend, everyone. That is it for the big story for the week.
We have some time to digest everything. The Arbitral Award and Alice Lealgo's case.
That's right.
Yeah, we have.
It's a big win. Although, again, it's the 8th anniversary now, and still a lot of skirmishes and run-ins at the West
Until
Philippine
then.
Sea.
Well, like
Monday.
attorney has said, it's a long game. We have to prepare
We have
ourselves
to play
for
the
that.
long game.
In the meantime, here's the weekend. We are One News, all sides, all the time.
Thanks for tuning in. Have a good night and a great weekend.